Well, as we come to the end of this week's devotionals, and particularly this particular portion of Paul's letter to the Colossians in chapter 1, that's verses 9 through 12, which I mentioned is like the longest sentence in the Old New Testament, I think. I don't know that for sure, but it's really long. It's 132 words in the English translation. And he talks about all these attributes that grace will produce in our lives if we allow God and if we follow the Lord. In other words, we're not too afraid to trust Him, but we keep on stepping out and taking those dynamic risks that really redefine our lives and make them worth something of eternal significance. But he finally says, after he says, endure with patience what you're going through. And then in the final phrase, he says, joyfully giving thanks to the Father. Joyfully giving thanks to the Father. Sometimes I have to step back and say, am I enjoying my life right now? And I have to ask myself, because I deal with a lot of hurt and pain, not just in my life, but in the lives of other people. I have people in my own family structure that are pretty dysfunctional and pretty damaged and making really bad choices, and it just saddens and grieves you beyond measure sometimes. It's just can be very, very overwhelming. The sadness that you feel over what's happening with people you love and you had such great hopes and aspirations for. At the same time, as a pastor, we're finding, particularly because there's been a 40% increase in what we might call premature deaths in our culture. People from 18 to 64 are supposed to be people of working age, and we don't expect them to, on average, to die above a certain rate. And that rate of death has jumped 40% in the last couple of years. And, as typical, they don't know what the cause is. They're really wondering because it's not one symptom or one cause. They have a wide variety of things that deal with people's hearts and strange kinds of cancers and just really some unusual things. Well, what that's meant for us is that we've done a lot of funerals since the first of the year. And I just honestly tell you, it's heartbreaking as a pastor to see the grief, the sorrow, the loss, and many of these people that I've known for decades, and seeing these people. It's glorious in the sense that they've gone home to be with the Lord. But for those of us who are left behind, that's why we weep with those who weep, Paul said. There's a time for grief, Solomon said in Ecclesiastes. And so I think we need to understand and feel that grief, because we live in a culture that doesn't really deal with grief very well. We offer what one writer put, platitudes of positiveness. We say things that are supposed to simply make the grieving person get better overnight. Now, the danger is if you're in grief that you get crushed by it. And that's what happens, because if sorrow begins to compound upon sorrow and there becomes remorse and regret and all this guilt and so forth, it can just really crush a person's spirit, and they can fall into a deep depression and not know how to get out. And if you've never been deeply depressed, it may sound like a simple thing to get away from, but for those who battle depression on an ongoing basis, it is horrifically difficult to come out on the other side. And one of the worst things that you and I can do is give people simple platitudes saying, well, hey, don't be depressed. All things work together for the good. Well, that's a theological truth. I believe that. But when you're in deep grief, it's really hard to understand how that's true. It's hard to see into the future how that you'll look back one day and say, thank you, God, for the adversity. So I really encourage people, be more sensitive to people who are in grief. A lot of times they don't need your words. What they need is for you to just simply listen to them. Let them share their grief. Because what I find, that people aren't really interested in hearing your sad stories, which is sad, because sad stories are what make us sad. And when we can share the sadness that we're feeling, many times just having somebody saying, as one politician famously used to say, I feel your pain. Well, he was quite successful in saying that to people, even though I don't think he actually did. But the simple fact was that people identified with that statement, because every one of us has a certain level or degree of grief in our life, and we want somebody who is going to really identify with that grief. And that's why I've come to discover that things that have crushed and broken my heart over the years have actually become the reservoirs from which I'm able to minister to somebody else. That when people are depressed, when they're discouraged, when they're defeated, when they feel like they've failed, when they've blown it in a major way, and I can sit back and say, you know what? let me tell my story, that your story is not that different from mine, and yet God did work through all of that in my life. And that really is giving hope to other people. It's not just simply trying to put a Band-Aid on the owie. When my grandkids or my kids were small, they'd fall down, skin their knees, and be crying, and we just, grab them and say, let me pray for you real quick. And we played, Lord, just take that pain away. And more times than not, the kids would stop crying and the pain would cease. I don't think it was because of divine healing, but I think it just took their eyes off it. I think they were more frightened by their injury than they were hurt by their injury. Well, whether that's true or not, we'll find out one day. But the simple fact is that just having somebody else be compassionate and supportive and prayerful for us makes a huge difference.